Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, horticulture educator with University of Illinois Extension, coming at you from Macomb, Illinois. And we have got a great show for you today. We are going to be talking about the impacts that plant diseases have had throughout our human history. This is going to be a fascinating topic. We're going to be talking with Chelsea Harbach about this. But before we get to Chelsea, we must introduce our co-host with us every single week. We are joined by horticulture educator Ken Johnson in Jacksonville. Hey, Ken.
Hello, Chris. How are you?
I am saying no complaints today because we're about to get close to 70 degrees tomorrow, and it's March 15th right now. So I'm so happy right now. How about you, Ken? How are you feeling with this warmer weather?
Well, I'm kind of the point now, if it's going to stay warm, I better stay warm. No more of this up and down, so I can get all my plants outside and be done with it.
Yeah. Well, the plants are definitely ready to get outside. At least in my house, they are. They're like, you're killing us. Please send us outside. Are you going to do any beard trimming? I got an appointment with my razor coming up pretty soon.
Some trimming, yes. Probably not clean shaven.
Not clean
My
shaven.
kids wouldn't know who I am, so.
Yeah. I'll shave it down to about an inch, but then I gotta keep it going because it keeps your skin hydrated. So it's really nice. Yeah.
When we get that sudden cold snap, it'll keep you warm.
Exactly. That's right. Everyone else's faces are freezing, and ours are like, oh yeah, insulation. Well, Ken, I know that you have a particular affinity for diseases and insects and kind of the things that make other people squeamish and squirm. But today, I think we got a really interesting topic about how plant diseases have affected our human history, like just in pretty major ways. So I don't know. Are you excited about this topic as I am?
I am. So you kind of hear briefly about some of this stuff in classes and stuff, but never really too in depth. So looking forward to it.
I am too. I love history, and then I love plants. And so what better thing to do than merge these two subjects today? So let's introduce our guest for today, Chelsea Harbach. Chelsea, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, I just got done shaving my beard.
Oh, it's nice clean shave. I love it. I love it. You could put your hair up maybe and yeah. So Chelsea, you are a commercial agriculture educator with University of Illinois Extension. Whereabouts are you located in the state?
I work from the research farm that's outside of Monmouth. I live in Knoxville, so I'm, Western Illinois, not too far from you or Ken, really, in the grand scheme of things.
And we got so a lot of fun projects happening in Knoxville. Knoxville's a beautiful town, it's like walkable, beautiful houses, nice schools. So yeah, it's a wonderful place to be. So we're happy to have you here with us, Chelsea, talking about plant diseases. But I really have to ask, plants get sick for real? Like
they, I've been looking forward to this day for a long time because I had the Master Gardener plant disease training this morning, and then I had this podcast in the afternoon, so I get a full day talking about plant diseases. And one of the first things I told the Master Gardeners this morning is, just like you and I get sick, plants can also get sick. Basically anything that's alive can get sick. And, we as humans have a particular affinity for plants. And so that's, largely why we care about plants and the fact that they get sick.
So we've been hearing, of course, about the coronaviruses, which is a virus, obviously. And we have bacteria, we have antibiotics for bacteria. Athlete's foot is a fungus. So are these all like plants? Are they also afflicted by these three disease-causing organisms?
Yeah. So, the things that make us sick, we generally think mostly of like microorganisms. So we're talking about fungi, we're talking about bacteria, viruses, even nematodes are lumped in there as well. We can see some of these things. Some of these things we need microscopes to see. Some of them you need special microscopes to see. So they really vary in size, but all the same kinds of microorganisms that make us sick have the same ability to make plants sick, but obviously they're different species. We're not going to get sick from the Sclerotinia sclerotium that causes white mold on plants. That's not going to make us sick, similar to, like the flu virus isn't going to make your begonia sick. They're all specialized specific species.
So I can keep licking the powdery mildew off of my lilacs. Okay, so
if that's your jam, go for it.
Tastes great. I don't recommend it to anybody.
I'll take your word for it.
So it might have been you, Chelsea. We do a lot of these shows a year, and so if I'm wrong, I'm sorry. Someone had mentioned, I thought it was you, that they found the tobacco mosaic virus within the human genome, like within our genetics. It's something
I don't know. That wasn't me, but that's believable to me for how prevalent TMV is and how prevalent tobacco use is. I'm gonna look into that though, because that is really interesting. But continue your thought, because I do want to hear this out. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Oh no, I was just like curious because I know, as you mentioned, the idea of a plant virus or bacteria jumping cross family trees, crossing kingdoms into mammals, like animals, highly unlikely. But I think the idea that they found kind of these trace parts of tobacco mosaic virus within humans might suggest that at one point in time, long time ago, that did at one point happen. So yeah, someone had mentioned that on the show before. Ken, do you recall? Boy, I'm drawing a blank here.
I don't remember that. Maybe that was one of the ones I wasn't on.
Oh, Ken, you're taking too many vacations.
You know what that reminds me of is I'm sure you know the general concept of, evolution and species development, but this concept that the mitochondria and chloroplasts in plant, or so chloroplasts in plant cells and mitochondria in mammal cells are likely some sort of descendant of bacteria that were, essentially like absorbed. That's why they have double lipid membranes. And, just like a way for these organisms to continue functioning. I don't know. It's cool. Biology is awesome.
Oh, it's so cool.
Yeah.
I love I remember in biology high school, we were talking about photosynthesis, and then we would learn about animal cells, and we learn about vitamin D conversion with sunlight in animals. It's like, wait a second. So we kind of also have that capability. Like, we used to be able to synthesize vitamin C from sunlight. Like, why would we get rid of that? Oh man, come on, evolution.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So speaking of diseases, which school of thought are you on viruses? Are they living or are they not living?
Oh man. I have never decided, truly. It's something that it's one of those things that just perplexes me, and just like my mind goes around and around in a circle. I can't make a final decision on that. It's just too much for my brain. What about you?
That's beyond my pay grade. I could see arguments both ways, but that's beyond my intellect to figure out.
My uninformed intellect would say they're aliens that have been scattered across this planet from meteorites millions of years ago, maybe billions of years ago. And that's what a virus is, because when like the structure in the animations, it looks
Right.
like a miniature
It
Sputnik
does.
or something. Like it
Yeah.
looks like somebody like created that thing. It looks like it's
That's-
weird looking.
And that's like only a specific type of virus.
Right.
Is it?
Those are like
Okay.
the
Yeah, those are like the phage viruses.
bacteriophages and
Yeah.
stuff.
Those are the aliens then,
Mhm.
Like
that have infected us now. Yeah.
it's like your tobacco mosaic virus is just a rod
Yeah.
of stuff.
But it is really interesting because these, they're just like like strands of nucleic acid that like can't multiply on their own, but yet they're made of something that is like we think of inherently as living. So that's where my mind just like goes in those circles. I can't make a decision. I don't know.
They're zombies. We'll go with
Yeah.
zombies.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that better. That's my sci-fi pick of the week because there's zombies.
So getting back to plants and diseases here, humans domesticated plants 10, 12,000 years ago, something like that. And since then, we're definitely now dealing with plant diseases. And a lot of those have had significant impacts on civilization, thus today's topic. So let's start with ancient Rome. How was that? What was ancient Rome farm life like? Or farms like?
Well, they relied heavily on wheat. As the Roman Empire expanded, they, found wheat or they took wheat and brought it back. And, that was like the primary like staple in their what's the word I want to say, in their diet. There we go. And so it was, grown wide and large across the Roman Empire. And, you know, as as humans have, domesticated plants, we're prone to growing things in, more of a monoculture kind of way. So that's kind of the way things were back then, with wheat. Obviously they grew other things too, but wheat was the big one, and there was a lot of it, and they really depended on it for their nutrition. And as things go in monocultures, there's usually it's kind of leaves you pretty open and vulnerable to, I guess, what you might consider like an opportunistic event. Of course, back then, they did not know anything about like diseases. I mean, like obviously you knew when people were sick, but they didn't know anything about like plant diseases. They didn't know anything about microbiology. So we're talking like ancient Rome, right? They're still worshiping the Roman pantheon of gods. And so they would see the incidence of like orange, rusty colored kind of like flecks on the stems in the spring. So that's why this discussion is timely. We're approaching about that time of the year where this disease we might actually see on wheat. So on they determined that it was like April 25th in our current calendar, or not current calendar year, but our, the calendar that we use now, is when the ancient Romans would perform or like have this ritual. They called it Robigalia, where they were essentially like pandering to the gods, one specific god in general. They did not, it hasn't been like, there's no consensus on whether the god was like female or male. So like there's two different iterations of the god's name, but we'll just go with Robius, which I think is the male version of the name. I think the female version was Robia. But they, believe, not knowing anything about microbiology, thinking more along the lines of like, what's the word? superstition, basically, with all the gods. So, they were trying to make the gods happy to try and stave off the incidence of this rusty, dark brown flecking on their wheat, which they, over time noticed that the incidence of this symptom, this, which we now know as a sign, but I won't get into semantics of that. That's for master gardener training. But so they would notice that the incidence of these spots on the stems would decrease their yield. It would essentially lead to the plants dying quicker. So they wanted to find ways to help prevent that. And so they prayed to the gods. And that, of course, came along with some other things, this ritual. So I forget if I said already, but the ritual is called Robigalia. April 25th. So if you want to celebrate Robigalia, be my guest. But I don't think people like Ken and I mean, I feign being a redhead. My hair's just like kind of reddish brown. I would say it's more auburn. But my friend who is a full-on redhead told me that, like, you count as a redhead. She assured me. So I took her word for it. So I don't think Ken and I would be too happy about Robigalia because, well, I mean, they weren't killing people, but they were sacrificing red-haired animals like dogs as a way to appease the gods and try and stave off the incidence of this malady that afflicted their wheat.
I would only suspect if the animals weren't working, they'd turn to the redhead next to them and say, "You're next."
I know, right? So when I TA'd for the introductory to plant path course in 2013 or 2014 and 2015, when Nate Schroeder came to U of I, he's the nematologist on campus, or one of them. He actually, I don't know, if his dog is still with us, but he had a red-haired dog named Rusty. And I wonder if he named that dog specifically because he knew about Robigalia and wheat rust. But yeah, I mean, my dog also has some red hair, so I really wouldn't like that. But I mean, what do you do? I mean, when you don't have microscopes, you don't know about diseases. Everything back then was superstition. So
if things aren't working out with Robius, you go to Robia. If that's not working out, you gotta, there's so many people to turn to. Yeah. Oh, that would be, I couldn't do well then. But I'm using my modern day brain. I don't know. Maybe I would fit right in back then and just be like, here's my red-haired retriever. Kill it.
I have to believe that they likely didn't have the same affinity for their animals the way we do now. I know even people in other countries think that Americans are crazy for how we regard our pets. So
all my pets have their own voices that I speak to them in.
Yes.
So yes. Not crazy. It just makes sense.
Yeah. So that the historians, kind of discerned from, what they could find in history that the disease that the wheat was afflicted with was stem rust of wheat. And this pathogen also, the historical significance extends beyond Robigalia because it was this pathogen. Okay, so there's a couple different things. It's number one of the most complex disease cycles that you can learn in plant pathology. I remember probably spending a few hours trying to memorize it from when I took Introduction to Plant Path. It's a complicated disease cycle that actually requires two different hosts to complete the life cycle. So, when when stem rust became like a big problem in I don't know, like the mid to, or I guess like early mid, late mid 1990s in the US, there was a huge effort to get rid of all of the barberry plants because barberry is the alternate host that's needed for this fungus to complete its life cycle.
Mm.
So I believe barberry was introduced, kind of as a, pardon me, like a landscape plant, and it turns out it's quite prolific. It can be kind of invasive. So there was like a huge effort to get rid of all the barberry, as much as possible, to try and limit the amount of inoculum that's out there in the spring to go infect wheat. So then the other significance of historical significance of stem rust of wheat ties into Norman Borlaug, who is like the progenitor of essentially the Green Revolution is what they called it. And so he's a plant breeder, plant pathologist. He's actually, he was born in Iowa. He worked up in Minnesota, but he spent a lot of time doing plant breeding on wheat to there were a couple different purposes, but the big purpose for him was to make plants that were shorter so that way they wouldn't lodge as much, and then by having plants that can stand erect better, you are going to have an easier time applying like fungicides and getting more control. The environment in there is going to be maybe a little less conducive than if the plants were lodged over. But I believe he also did some work on developing some wheat varieties that had some resistance to stem rust as well. So he really changed the limits, the capacity for wheat growing in the breadbasket in the Middle East. That's where he, like, a lot of his work was applied. And yeah, he was just an awesome dude, plant pathology turned plant breeder, who, father of the Green Revolution, all because, well, not all because, but partially in part because of this same disease that the Romans were praying and sacrificing their dogs to stave off. So, we came a long way in 1,000 or so years in our advancement of managing this disease.
I would say our pets are better off today. And that's another reason why we should not be planting barberries.
Yeah. Yep. I had to do some weeding in a field once, and they were like some small, I mean, they were that big, but like I could tell they were barberry plants, and they were not fun to try and get out of the ground.
Yeah, they're covered in thorns. And so their neighbor has some of that crimson pygmy barberry, it's the purple leaf type. When they escape, they revert to their green form. At least they did it in my backyard. And so I didn't notice it at first, but then when I went to pull it, and I got thorns in my fingers, and I realized, I looked closer, like, oh, this is a barberry, not far away from the neighbor's crimson pygmy barberry. So yeah, that's another lesson, folks.
That's another lesson. Yeah, we can definitely touch on that later too.
Well, Chelsea, shifting gears to a different plant disease. We are coming up just a couple days away from St. Patrick's Day. Actually, when people are listening to this, it will have passed, but you should be celebrating into the weekend, folks. Potatoes and Ireland, or Irish folk, seem to go hand in hand. So I guess my first question is, Chelsea, when growing potatoes, why are we tying the two together to Ireland? Why are potatoes in Ireland linked?
Well, so potatoes, okay. The Spanish conquistadors were the ones to bring potatoes back. The Incas were the ones who were originally cultivating the potatoes. And as the world expanded, the colonizers took took stuff for them. And, this book that I read, says, the Spanish brought back, all the riches. They brought back silver and gold and jewels or something. But, they didn't list the thing that was probably most valuable. That was potatoes. So potatoes worked their way through Europe, eventually found their way to Ireland, and became a really, so this is like 1800s. This was became essentially like a staple for the Irish people, and that has to do partially because of there's some like economics and like sociological stuff that I don't have like the firmest grasp on, but basically at this point Ireland was still a part of the UK, and so the land was owned by English people who were basically like absentee landlords and sent I want to call them ruffians, but I mean people to like enforce, collecting of like crops and money to satisfy the landlords. So the Irish were they were, planting or growing things like wheat. That's the stuff that like sold really well, and or that they could get the most money for. But then they were able to grow potatoes that were kind of hidden. And so when these, I'm just going to stick with ruffians now, when these ruffians came to collect, they would take the wheat, and either they didn't know or didn't care to look for, maybe what these, big green bushy plants were producing, because it wasn't, you don't really think much about like the green berries on a potato plant, because, they knew essentially that those are not, they're not, they're poisonous basically.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of the Irish people's way of, securing that they would have enough nourishment for the year. And it actually led to, I believe it was from like 1800 to 1840 or so, the Irish population doubled from, I think it was I don't remember if it's 4 million to 8 million or 2 million to 4 million, but regardless, it doubled. And there's, some different things that people, hypostulate could be the cause of that. And one of them being the fact that they had this really stable, high caloric, high protein food source in the potatoes. So, they relied on the potatoes for their life. I mean, potatoes meant life for them in the 1840s, 1800s.
We were joking about Samwise Gamgee's line from Lord of the Rings before the show started, and you can do so much with potatoes. There's a lot. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. I had potatoes for lunch today.
Did I? No, I did, but I have them like all the time. Like,
Yeah.
And that's like a Midwestern diet too. It's like meat and potatoes. Like that's what I was raised on, and a veggie, usually something green. Okay, so it kind of unfortunate circumstances why Ireland is really tied to the potato, but they made it their own. It became a staple crop for them. When did things start going south? What was like the sign that something's wrong here, that the potatoes don't look good?
It was 1845, and they first noticed some, of the above ground symptoms of, they at that point just called it a disease. They recognized that the plant isn't behaving or looking as normal, so they knew enough to call it a disease, but they had no idea what was going on. Essentially, plants were kind of like shriveling up, dying, just kind of melting is like the best way to describe what this pathogen does to the potato plants. They just kind of melt. But they, they dug up the tubers, and the tubers were seemingly unaffected. So, they were able, and granted, like at this point, not all of the potatoes were affected. It was, a little more scattered, but at this point there were some environmental conditions that favored the disease development as well. And but they still were able to harvest some potatoes, but granted, not as much as they needed. But they found ways. They kind of like they threw their potatoes in storage. They found ways to make ends meet, and fulfill their sustenance needs. But then the issue comes when they need to plant the tubers in the following year. And also I guess during the winter too, they're finding their stores of potatoes, some of them are rotting, so they're trying to save some of the potatoes. I might have said tomatoes at some point, but I definitely mean potatoes. But yeah, so 1845 was the start of it. And the first person didn't actually die as a result of starvation in Ireland until I think it was August of 1846. But it all went downhill from there. In 1846, they had kind of the same thing. They had fewer tubers to start with, and so less planted, more disease, again, high environmental or high favorability from the environmental conditions. And between that point in August when the first person died in 1846 to I forget at what point in 1847 there were 1 million people that died as a result of the Irish potato famine, and also 1 million people that immigrated. And then, there's some of this socioeconomic issues that are tied into all of that as well. They despite the fact that they were still forced to continue growing wheat and sending it off, so the landlords were more worried about collecting what was due to them than ensuring that their tenants were able to survive. And I don't know, is just really devastating and a mess. And I think that, well, so I did see that so I'm curious first, if you, Chris, or you can attribute any Irish heritage in your family.
According to my parents, I am German. Okay. According to the genetics tests that I've taken, and my dad's adopted and he's never learned his genetic parents, but according to the genetics test I'm taking, I'm 80% Irish. So
whoa, wow.
Yeah, I'm very Irish, apparently, not as German as I thought I was. Ken, where's your backgrounds lie?
Irish, German, some other things thrown in there.
Yeah, and I know, well, so as far, I haven't taken the genetic test. I mean, Harbach is very obviously German. So I don't know about me, but I know my partner, her family has some Irish roots as well. So, that they talk about, 40 plus million people in America can claim some sort of Irish heritage, and that largely has to do with the mass immigration as a result of the Irish potato famine, which I think maybe they just call the Great Famine, but I'm habituated to calling it the Irish Potato Famine because it was largely because of the loss of the potato. And also one of the it's not a silver lining, it's just something good that came out of this was the actual discovery and the first time of actually putting a name and a cause to something. So there's a German scientist named Anton de Berry who investigated this late blight. Well, whatever was going on with potatoes. They didn't know what it was yet. And, scientists previously had looked at it, and they just attributed this like fuzzy growth as a result of the plants dying and not causing the plants to die. But Anton de Berry was the first one to actually essentially prove that the fuzzy stuff that was growing on the plants was what was causing the plants to die, and not a result of the plants dying. So he's regarded as the father of plant pathology. He is so, as obviously, pardon me, devastating as the Irish potato famine is, it also is kind of the jumping off point for the study of plant diseases.
It's one of those things, like we have to figure out what's happening, or there's a lot more people that possibly starve. And you had mentioned before the show another story about how this disease reared its head again in World War One. What was that?
Well, so first I want to do a plug for this book. Like I said, it's not in print anymore, but it is a really fun read, and it captures a lot of the different historical significant impacts of plant diseases. It's called Famine on the Wind. It's written by G.L. Carefoot and E.R. Sprott. Again, it's not in print, so you can tell this is an old book by the cover, the pages, but you might be able to find a copy on like Amazon or eBay or something. But in preparing for the show, I was reading up on, making sure that I knew my facts about the Irish potato famine. And in all of my learning, past learning and hearing about the Irish potato famine, and the significance of late blight, I learned something from this book that I never knew. That we think mostly of the 1840s and the Irish potato famine as we think about the significance of late blight, but this book actually outlines another very significant historical incidents where late blight, possibly altered the course of history. So the Germans in World War One, at that point there was still a pretty heavy reliance on potatoes in the diet, and it was 1915, I think, they had an incredible potato harvest, and so they instead of they didn't have enough room on the farms to store the potatoes, so they stored the extra potatoes in cities, essentially in places that aren't suitable for potato storage. And if you're storing somewhere, ideal storage for potato is cool and dry. You've got cool and dry conditions. You are doing something to help prevent any possible post-harvest flare-ups of post-harvest diseases. Wherever they stored the potatoes in the cities was not cool and dry, because they started to have the smell of rot. There was a brief anecdote about kids actually getting out of school because it smelled so bad, and then the teachers and stuff had to help clean out the potato storage areas because they were just rotten. Late blight had there was some tubers affected, obviously, with late blight, and improper storage led to just a complete rot of this surplus of potatoes that they had. And they actually it was 700,000 people starved as a result of that lack of food and lack of sustenance, and that had a impact on morale of the soldiers and just the general outlook overall, which I think it sounds and I would believe it likely changed the course of history of
Mhm.
the, change the tides in that war.
Oh, that's fascinating. So don't store your potatoes in steam tunnels. That's probably bad. I'm just
Yeah.
assuming that's where they put them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's
Yeah.
just that. That's fascinating. So we've talked rust. That's a fungus. We've
Mhm.
talked the late blight. Is that a
As an
bacterial?
oomycete. So it's a
Oh,
fungal-like
my favorite.
organism. Yes.
Oh, my favorite.
Oh,
Yes.
oh.
Love it.
And I can't imagine how bad that would smell. I mean, one rotten tomato or one rotten potato is bad enough, but
At
Exactly.
least it wasn't like bacterial soft rot. That's what really stinks. But anything that's rotten is gonna smell bad.
I remember in grad school, we'd do some trials and stuff in cantaloupe and
Uh-huh.
walking through fields with rotten cantaloupes.
Ay, ay,
To this
ay.
day, I can't
Ooh.
eat cantaloupe. Just thinking about it, I can smell it and just makes me
Oh
sick.
no.
Yeah, that bacterial soft rot and stuff get in
Yeah.
there. And yeah.
Oh, that's ugh.
it's what nightmares are made of.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we'll get away from stinky stuff here. So tulip mania is a lot of times referred to as one of the first financial bubbles, if not the first. That kind of collapse of all of that. A lot of money was being spent on tulip bulbs back in the day, and a lot of money was lost because of this. So is this tulip mania driven by some diseases as well?
There definitely was like a factor of plant diseases in tulip mania. I will admit that like largely, it's still kind of mostly an economic phenomenon and maybe a little less of a plant disease phenomenon, but there was a factor of plant diseases in this whole tulip mania. So tulips like rose in popularity and kind of became a status symbol in the Netherlands in the like late 1500s into 1600s. And it was basically like the more tulips you have, the like people could kind of like tell, oh, this person's better off. And so they were collecting different colors of tulips, but then occasionally they would have the incidence of a tulip that looks like those in my background. They call them like a flame tulips because they kind of, I mean, with like the streaking or what we now call color breaking, kind of gives an effect where it looks like these tulips are kind of on fire, but it's just a cool color. Well, so they obviously didn't know this at the time, and again, this is a 1600, so we're talking pre like really anything with microbiology, let alone like plant pathology. But we later found out that the symptom is caused by a virus called tulip break virus, which causes this distinct color breaking in the flowers. But they didn't know that. They saw these tulips and they're like, ooh, these are so cool. And I mean, I think the same thing. They're really cool looking. But so tulips like these, we're talking, all tulips were expensive. But if you could get your hands on one of these bulbs or contract for one of these bulbs, those were like the most expensive. So tulip biology, some of these bulbs don't actually produce flowers for like 6 or 7 years. People are getting, or like, instead of like having like the tangible tulip bulbs, they're doing I think they called it like future contracts, essentially like the what is like the modern day version of a future contract. So they would pay someone for a contract, and this contract says you will get this tulip when it is ready, basically. So tulips being the hot commodity, the hot status thing that they were, you can have this contract or you could sell it and make a profit before, you like snag the tulip. So that's kind of where things went with the tulip trade. People just kept selling these contracts, and I do think that the like tulip breaking virus, these tulip bulbs are going to be less vigorous over time. So, if people did get a bulb that had come from a tulip break virus flower, those aren't going to be as vigorous and last as long. So that's one of the problems, but I think the biggest problem is still the financial stuff, because they just in general are essentially like hedging their bets that this thing that really doesn't have any real worth, they're hedging their bets that it's continue to increase in value. So as they do this over time, eventually people are like, maybe this doesn't have, the value, right? And so like the tulip market crashed pretty much overnight. It was like climbing, in I think it was 1636. It was nearing its peak, and then it was like a February 3rd or something in 1637, it just plummeted because the people who were doing the like selling of the contracts, they just like kind of decided like maybe it's not worth as much. And so, once somebody starts to decide that it's not worth as much, that trend continues. And so it was this bubble, it popped. But so while plant disease isn't playing like a significant role, I mean, the fact that people saw tulips like this and thought that it was worth, like an entire like 5 houses or like 3 years worth of salary at that point, like, I mean, that's insane. I can't imagine ever attributing that much value to something. I mean, maybe like a really big tree, but like a small little herbaceous ornamental that flowers for like a small window in each year. Can you imagine?
The deer will just probably wind up eating, or a squirrel will dig
Yeah.
up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the way you describe it's like, so it's like the fool's marketplace. If it's foolish to buy a tulip for hundreds of thousands of dollars, you just have to find someone more foolish to buy it for, $1 million. So it's just, and then, like you said, they decided, no, you ran out of fools. And so then the market crashes, and they're beautiful tulips though.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's been likened to like the housing crash in the 2000s, and then like the Bitcoin bubble. And I would even argue even like probably where NFTs are going is very similar to tulip mania. But I will say that the tulips that you will see nowadays with this color breaking symptom are bred for. So you don't have to worry about like, if you want a tulip that's pretty like this now, you can buy one that's going to be completely healthy without virus. It's important for me to put that out there because they are beautiful flowers. I am also a big tulip fan. And yeah, so you can get healthy, beautiful, color broken flowers that are free of the virus now, but you can also get them for much cheaper.
Ken and I, we've both mortgaged our houses, and we've invested our retirement funds in tulips. So,
oh boy, good luck
Holding out
to
for
you.
holding out for next tulip mania.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. Good
Well,
luck.
yeah, we'll see. I don't know if I know what to do with retirement money, if I would ever get some. So,
Right.
just buy tulips. That's yeah. That's what I'll do. So Chelsea, we've talked about all kinds of diseases today. Through the history of all the impacts and how they've influenced things and such. I mean, lots of people have died because of this. Lots of people have had their lives ruined because of this. Have we learned anything? What have we learned that can make it so that this doesn't keep happening?
Well, I think, some of what we learned is the importance and significance. Well, first of all, we've learned that plant diseases are a thing. We know that microbes exist. But then I think, one of the biggest things that we've learned is the importance of like cultural management and like in helping to like either mitigate or prevent diseases. So, if we go back to wheat stem rust, there we go. The fact that they're able to breed for varieties of wheat that are resistant. There are also epidemiologists that have done a lot of work to try and like predict when some of these diseases might be more problematic, which will allow for timely fungicide sprays. And then in the case of the potato, I think one of the things I didn't touch on in the Irish Potato Famine, one of the things that factored into this too is that they grew a single cultivar of potato all throughout. There was no diversity in the genetics of the potatoes they were cultivating. So not only is like monoculture is not a great idea if you can avoid it, but also diversity of genetics within that single species that you're cultivating can be really important in mitigating or managing plant diseases. And then on the topic of storage, proper storage of things like things that you harvest and store. So like you're not gonna harvest a tulip. Well, I mean the bulbs you would store, but things that you eat, especially like things that are like fresh market produce, like proper storage of that stuff for like to manage for any post-harvest pathogen is critically important. And there's a lot of people who do research on working to improve some of that stuff. And then as far as the tulips go, I think we've learned maybe don't give into the hysteria and maybe try to maintain a little bit of a level mind. And I don't know, I guess like I'm a cautious person when it comes to economics, so who's to say if I would have given into this back then, but I like to think that I wouldn't. But I don't know, I mean, I guess I guess realistically I probably would have given into it. And then I would have been financially ruined because of a tulip in the 1600s. But
you would have had a nice little snack though after you lost your house and everything else, and you're like, well, I can eat it at least.
Look at this little bulb. Yeah. So and like I mentioned, the Irish Potato Famine was the catalyst for the study of plant diseases too. So we've gone far and beyond as far as like developing and trying to determine ways to manage plant diseases. But my favorite are the cultural practices, and so I think that's kind of what we take out of all of this, some of the different cultural things that we can do to help mitigate and manage and or prevent plant diseases.
Well, that is a lot of great information for us, whether we're growing wheat, potatoes, or tulips, and so many other things out there too. So Chelsea Harbach, commercial ag educator, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me again. I love talking about plant diseases, and I like history too. So this stuff is like the coolest to me, and I'm just jazzed to talk about people who also like it.
Well, we might mark this as part one of a multi-part series here of we'll see what's next up in your chapter of Famine in the Wind, because I have to find that book somehow. So I'm going to be hunting around for that. Well, the Good Growing Podcast is produced by Wendy Ferguson and edited this week by Katie Parker. We miss Katie, but she will be here in spirit editing away. Ken Johnson, thank you so much for being with us this week. Good to see you, Ken.
You too. Thanks, Chelsea. It was fun learning more about some of this stuff, and I think we'll definitely have to do at least a part two if not.
Yeah,
more
I
than
got
that.
some spooky stuff that I can
Mm.
talk about around spooky season,
Ooh, spooky season.
including. No, I'll talk about
Oh.
this later. I'll talk about this later.
She's like,
I'll
oh,
save
that
it
was
for
a
later.
teaser for
I'll
you.
save it.
Well, folks, this will be a fun part 2. So yeah, save it for then.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Well, we'll have something for listeners next week. So don't you worry. I think it'll be a Garden Bite episode by Ken. If I'm looking ahead in the calendar inside my brain,
It'll be a surprise.
Just yeah, surprise us, Ken, next week. We'll see what the topic is. Well, listeners, thank you for doing what you do best, and that is listening. If you're watching us on YouTube, and as always, keep on growing.